Well, good evening to you all, and thank you for being with us this evening. As most of us knows that Institute of Social and Cultural Studies as an autonomous organization has been addressing various contemporary issues along with its act and impact over events, activities, publications, and now through its range of webinars. Thus, in the view of given situation, it brings to you today's webinar on Saga of Galwan, which is an initiative to address significant events of the valley and also contemporary challenges over deliberation by our coordinator and eminent speakers. We have with us Rana Banerjee to coordinate today's webinar. Sri Rana Banerjee is a former IAS officer and a distinguished fellow and member governing council for the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, IPCS, New Delhi. Amongst the speakers, we have with us Shri Pratim Ranjan Bose, eminent journalist and an author, former Lieutenant General John Mukherjee, Dr. Andres Kaur, principal at Core Analytics, Political Risk Analysis, and of course, Shri Shubir Bhomik. I'm sure sir must have joined, editorial director, Eastern Link, and former BBC Reuters correspondent and an author. Now I request Shri Rana Banerjee, sir, please take it over.
Thank you, Pankana. It's indeed
Thank you, sir.
A great privilege to be coordinating this webinar on the saga of Galwan. Though the immediate tension along the LAC seems to be dissipating, we can by no means rest complacent in the backdrop of an assertive and untrustworthy China. Today's panel would be led by Sri Pratim Ranjan Bose, whose economic insights and columns for the Hindu Business Line are remembered by many. We shall look forward to hear with interest his thoughts on Ghulam Rasul Galwan's 1924 book, Servant of Sahibs, in the context of Galwan's strategic relevance today. It is great to introduce General John Mukherjee. I have known him for many years. He served with great distinction on the Kashmir theatre and in various important assignments in Eastern Command. He has written extensively on these subjects. We shall look forward to listen to his views on how the present confrontation developed and how he believes the future might pan out. It's an honor to welcome Dr. Anders Kaur, well-known political risk analyst, to this webinar. Earlier associated with the Social Science Research Unit of the US Army, his expertise on South China Sea disputes and China generally have earned much appreciation in Western academia. We shall look forward to his incisive analysis on the present developments. Then, of course, we have my good friend, the firebrand and intrepid journalist, Mr. Shubir Bhomik, whose knowledge of the Northeast is well documented and whose recent forays on his newly set up Eastern Link website may have rattled the Chinese establishment considerably to instigate even some hackers to target it. We shall look to Subir to give us not an alarming but a well-reasoned and prescient assessment of the future. Lastly, if time permits, I would add brief insights on abiding salience of the China-Pakistan relationship and relevance of the Economic Corridor, the CPEC. In their initial forays, I would request the speakers to keep to the 15 minutes time limit. After that, we shall try to open the floor for discussions. Mr. Pratim Ranjan Bose, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ICS. Thanks. A very good evening to speakers and audience. Thanks for inviting. In fact, I'm the odd one in this pack. I know more about trade, but one thing that connected me with this exercise is connectivity. Incidentally, when I got into this, when Arindam told me, for the first thing I said that I don't know about these things over there. But then as I was getting into it, I got very interesting insights into the connectivity issues, and that kept me hooked to it and of course, geopolitics coming and playing a role in that. So as we all know, India had two major concerns this summer, both originating from China. The first one is a pandemic, and the second was in an incursion or attempted incursion, leading to a deadly clash at the inhospitable geographies of Galwan River Valley, bordering Beijing-controlled strategic Aksai Chain Plateau in the higher regions of Himalayas in Ladakh. India lost control over the plateau in 1962. More than the clash that caused death on either side, it was the brutal and blatant nature of the Chinese offensive that shook the nation. It pointed at the fragility of peace on the northern border. Among the positives, the incident revived the memories of a forgotten Indian explorer, Ghulam Rasool Galwan, who chronicled hostilities of the Chinese way back in 1892 in his book, Servant of the Sahibs. Galwan, then a 14-year-old porter, was traveling with Charles Murray, the 7th Earl of Dunmore, and Major Roche in the Pamirs, the junction of Central, South, and East Asia. Those were the days when Tibet was yet to be prized open by the British, and Leh was an important town on the Silk routes connecting India with China, Central Asia, and Russia. From Leh, caravans used to move north via Nubra Valley, Karakoram Pass, Sanju Pass, etc. to reach Yarkand in present-day Uyghur Autonomous Region in Xinjiang province of China. From here, you could go to any direction. The movement was both ways, and the early invaders to India took to this path to cross the mighty Himalayas. Those were also the days of unending hostilities in the region. Tajiks have just lost control over Xinjiang to China's Qing dynasty, which itself would wither away in another decade or two. Soviet Russia was yet to be born. Russia was pushing the boundary across Central Asia and were picking up fights with the local warlords, including in Afghanistan, before invading Xinjiang in 1937. And the imperialist British, who had already established control over the South and Southeast Asia and are thick into opium trade in mainland China through the eastern coast, were wary of Russian plans, particularly with respect to Tibet. It was in those days when Ladakh, including Aksai Chain, Gilgit-Baltistan, and the entire Kashmir were ruled by the Maharaja of Jammu. Galwan used to accompany Sahibs on journeys lasting over months on the Silk routes. Most of them, like Lieutenant Colonel Sir Francis' young husband, who would later lead a military offensive on Tibet, bringing forth the Anglo-Tibetan Treaty of 1904, were on strategic diplomatic missions. And some, like Major H.H. Godwin Austen, the English topographer and geologist who determined the height of world's tallest peak, second tallest peak, A2, focused their energies on science, geography, anthropology, etc. Galwan not only accompanied many or most of these noteworthy travelers, including the names mentioned, but he remembered these journeys almost to the last detail with the burning desire to write a book. How extraordinary was that desire? Firstly, he was born in a poor family in 1878, raised by a single mother in abject poverty, as his father left for a woman in Uyghur. His grandfather was a robber. The word Galwan was used in Kashmir to refer social outcasts and people of disrepute, inferior races or tribes, robbers, etc. He was accompanying Sahibs to those harsh hilly tracks, riding above 18,000 feet from the age of 9. Formal education was out of his bounds. He was married at the age of 14, but before he could spend time with her, she died. Galwan was then camping in the hills. During the recent standoff, newspapers were full of versions attributing Galwan Valley to Ghulam Rasool Galwan and his heroics during the trip with Charles Murray, the Lord Sahib, as mentioned by Galwan. However, as we read the book, we find that Galwan, who had been brutally honest in describing life, including his jail term and flings, whatever it is, the lie matters, as he said, didn't mention a thing about this achievement. Let us assume that those pages were lost during back and forth movement of the manuscript between Galwan and the prime inspiration behind the book, a poor American Sahib and his wife for nearly 1.5 decades before it came out in 1924. Galwan started writing the book with barely a dozen of words in his talk. The book came out in quote unquote breaking English from London with a foreword by Sir Younghusband. His editor didn't write it for him, but helped him express his free spirit. That's exactly the beauty of this piece. During the period, Galwan became the chief native assistant of the British Joint Commissioner at Leh, but probably he was living his life for the sole purpose of writing that book, because the very next year he died at the age of 47. What left behind is not a literary work in the traditional sense of the term. Galwan didn't have the pedigree of Sharat Chandra Das, who was a civil engineer by training and ended up not only with a travelogue, Journey to Lhasa, the Diary of a Spy, but also as an outstanding scholar on Tibetan culture. He compiled a dictionary of Tibetan language. The only commonality between Das and Galwan was both ended up serving for Sir Younghusband. And yet, Galwan left behind an invaluable treasure, a candid common man's take on life in the region. It is rich on socio-cultural references like the sharp differences between Ladakhis and Baltis. An explorer will be thrilled to read the hair-raising experience of crossing Mustag Pass, that was once the shortest route between Yarkand and Baltistan before it was closed by the nature. It will tell you that Buddhism had deep impression on life in the region, cutting across religion. You will often hear Galwan saying that he will go to watch the tamasa of lamas. However, Hinduism suffered. We are at the same foot, we find that Hinduism suffered due to the practice of untouchability. While reading this book, you may reconstruct the history of the region. Khotan, that was once an Iranian Saga Buddhist kingdom on the edge of Taklamakan Desert, now ended up as part of Xinjiang province in China. Most importantly, it tells you that Ladakh of 19th century took pride in their Indian identity and had deep distrust to China. Before I end this remarks, I cannot but repeat one incident here. During the clash with Chinese somewhere in the Pamirs, Galwan was the only one to be injured from his camp. The Chinese first pleaded peace and then attacked from the behind. On the next day, Major Roche took account of the situation on other camp before and came out with his remarks. Rasul, don't be sorry. Here is only one you lying down. There among the Chinese are 7 men lying down, unquote. Thank you very much. Over to the chair.
Fascinating account, Mr. Bose. And the relevance to today's the casualty ratio could perhaps be relevant. I will now request Dr. Anders Kaur to please give his insights.
Thank you so much to ISCS for having me on this seminar. It is really an honor to address so many knowledgeable people from whom I welcome frank responses. Also, I thank Subir Baumik for introducing me to this organization and for his assistance in general. I'm an American, so you will have to forgive me, please, for my mispronunciation of Indian words. A June 15 clash in the Galwan Valley of northern India resulted in the deaths of 20 or more Indian and 35 or more Chinese soldiers, according to reporting and sources. Both countries appear to be downplaying the violence and withholding information in face-saving attempts at de-escalation, even as China has occupied new territory at the Y junction of 2 rivers, and the Chinese Foreign Ministry claimed the entire valley as its territory. Satellite photos from June 22 show a new Chinese encampment in Indian territory at the spot of China's attack. To deter the People's Liberation Army, PLA, in future, international economic sanctions should be imposed, and India should seek closer defense cooperation with countries like the United States, Japan, Australia, Britain, France, and Germany, all democracies, along with India, as well as with international organizations such as the European Union and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. The political fallout from the border clash, the bloodiest between China and India since 1967, is a mix of solemn commitments to defend territorial sovereignty and misinformation by China, and to a lesser extent in the highly partisan politics of India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, claims a strong defense of the nation from China while trying to downplay the incursion. On June 20, the Prime Minister went so far as to claim that China did not enter India's territory. But satellite photos of a new Chinese encampment on India's side of the de facto border is problematizing that message. Despite analysts seeing Modi as stronger on defense, Rahul Gandhi of the competing Indian National Congress has used the Indian Army's retreat to tar Modi as soft on China. China, too, is quietly disputing the BJP's account. Independent military analyst Song Zhongping, according to the New York Times, said India's claims of the Chinese death toll were too high, but the correct figure would not be released, quote, to avoid stimulating intense sentiment in India, unquote. China got what it wants and will let India crow about the death toll, apparently. China has millions more PLA soldiers it is willing to trade for more Indian territory. Galwan Valley is on the border of China-occupied Aksai Chin, as everyone on this call knows, and India-occupied Ladakh. Over 100 kilometers southeast of Galwan are other disputed parts of the de facto border, including a large saltwater lake called Pangong Tso and Jemchok village. Indian citizens in these areas are under pressure from the Chinese. Quote, the security forces posted in the region always show restraint, but people of Ladakh always confront the Chinese whenever there is an intrusion attempt, unquote, according to a former Ladakh official. Quote, in areas like Demchok and Chushul, a lot of grazing land has been intruded upon by the Chinese, unquote. Ladakh is the part of India-administered Kashmir that borders Aksai Chin. Kashmir is getting pressured by not only China from the northeast, but Pakistan from the northwest, again, as everyone here knows. To the immediate north of Ladakh is the Siachen Glacier, occupied in 1984 by the Indian Army and held against Pakistan at the cost of $1 million a day. To the northwest of Siachen is the Shaksgam Tract, ceded by Pakistan to China in 1963. To the west of Shaksgam, and here we're getting to an important part, is Pakistan-occupied Gilgit-Baltistan, a choke point for the $62 billion China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. Gilgit-Baltistan is essential for China's direct access to the Indian Ocean, but China and Pakistan's rights to the area are in question. Residents of the territory have little say in their own governance and fear growing Chinese influence. India claims Gilgit-Baltistan as its own and provides China with a military overlook on India's Darbuk-Shayok Daulat Beg Oldi DSDBO road between Leh and the Karakoram Pass. Started in 2001, the road links India's military facilities. I think someone has their mic on if you want to turn that off. Links India's military facilities near the border. This and other planned strategic road building slated for completion in 2022 provoked repeated protests from China. Thus, the Sino-Indian clashes along the de facto border with Aksai Chin have a strategic importance well beyond just the square kilometers taken in June, and even those taken in the 1962 war. CPEC, the biggest of China's Belt and Road initiatives, provides all of China with a lifeline if its access to its near seas, such as the South China Sea or East China Sea, were cut in an emergency such as a war. India's claims to China-occupied Aksai Chin and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan are therefore perceived by China as a strategic threat. For the rest of the world, they are a strategic opportunity. Fueling the conflict is a refusal by China to demarcate the border throughout history. When the British ruled India, China rejected all 5 proposals between 1846 and 1914 to do so. In the 1950s, Nehru sought to confirm the border with Zhou Enlai, who assured him that Chinese maps showing large parts of India as Chinese territory were, quote, outdated, unquote. And the McMahon line was an, quote, accomplished fact. Then in 1957, China surprised India by announcing that it had built a road across Aksai Chin between Xinjiang and Tibet. In 2003, China seemed ready to demarcate the border finally through an exchange of maps, but after military officials briefly made the exchange, the Chinese officials double-crossed India and took their map back. Rising military risks from China and Russia's dependence on exports to the country will increase pressures on India to distance itself from its historical friendship with Russia, end its non-alignment, and I know that's very controversial for an Indian audience, and side with other democracies and allies seeking to balance against China's rise. The United States, Japan, Australia, and the other democracies and organizations we've mentioned. ASEAN members such as the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia are also possible allies against China in that China's 2009 claim to the South China Sea is restricting their maritime rights. The official story from the New Delhi is that 20 Indians died in the clash on June 15. Prime Minister Narendra Modi claimed that the Chinese troops never strayed into Indian territory. This appears incorrect in light of the photos from the satellites. A satellite photo from May 22 shows 15 to 20 Chinese soldiers around a large tent set up on the bank of the Galwan River near Patrol Point 14, about 137 meters inside Indian territory from the LAC. Modi's statement surprised Indian analysts who point to all of Aksai Chin's 38,000 square kilometers as occupied. China also attempted to occupy India's state of Arunachal Pradesh in 1962. China continued to press on India's borders during the latter's 1965 war with Pakistan, starting in 1962 and 1966, respectively. Pakistan and China supported Naga secessionists in India's northeast. In 1967, China attempted to stop India from building a fence at Nathi La near Doklam, but was turned away through fighting, in which India lost 200 men and China lost 300. Chinese pressure on India subsided as the PLA shifted its attention to its Manchurian border, where Russian troops were building up in preparation for the 1969 war. Perhaps to avoid war, India seeks to present the current clash in mild terms as a relatively fair fight, though one in which Chinese troops were aggressors. Even lacking details and in the context of at least some apparent misinformation, the Indian deaths thoroughly angered the Indian public, whose demonstrations put pressure on the government towards economic or even military retaliation. There's a politically driven lack of trust in the prime minister by the INC, whose analysts perhaps hypocritically claim to see him as too close to China. Sadly, most countries and most leaders that are doing trade with China right now are too close to China. So it's not specific to India. In a June 6 article, Bharat Karnat estimated that the most recent of China's incursions took 35 to 40 square kilometers of Indian land, bringing the total recent losses to more than 1,200 square kilometers. In order to minimize risks of escalation between the two nuclear-armed countries, agreements in 1996 and 2005 require that soldiers of China and India not use firearms during interactions near the LAC. Indeed, video evidence shows soldiers on both sides scuffling without firearms. The evidence points to a pre-planned clash by China at Galwan. From at least May 5, the Indian military and satellite imagery recorded a buildup on the Chinese side of the LAC of armored personnel carriers, self-propelled artillery, and up to 35,000 soldiers across its border from India's Ladakh region, including at Galwan, Pangong Tso, Gogra Hot Springs, Depsang, and Daulat Beg Oldi. At Depsang, Chinese armored formations have amassed along the LAC, while a 2-kilometer deep incursion has taken place near Gogra, where PLA troops were deployed, according to the Economic Times. June 22 satellite photos show 4 Chinese cranes, 2 bulldozers, and what appears to be a road leveler at Galwan. India sought to mirror this buildup on its side, including through a current deployment of up to 45,000 soldiers. Some Indian analysts believe that leaders in the Western Theater Command, WTC, including General Zhao Chongqi and Lieutenant General Xu Qingling, engineered the conflict to promote themselves within the Chinese Communist Party. They believe the same incentives drove the Doklam conflict in 2017. This story is supported by a U.S. intelligence assessment, but should not absolve Secretary General Xi Jinping, whose responsibility it is to rein in his subalterns. According to the assessment, and perhaps purposefully redolent of the Sino-Vietnamese War of 1979, in which he took part, General Zhao in the recent clashes reportedly sought to, quote, teach India a lesson, unquote. He used exactly the same words, or China used exactly the same words in the 1979 war with Vietnam. The competing stories spawned by a lack of reporter access to soldiers who were involved in the Galwan clash indicate attempts at information operations by both China and India, as well as by the INC. But regardless of which story one believes, China's role in creating the border conflict with India, from refusing to demarcate the border as far back as the 19th century to initiating the 1962 war, an undeniable continued pushing of boundaries with incrementalism and gray zone tactics today, should be condemned by the international community. The response should be economic sanctions and the holding of China's leadership personally responsible. Xi Jinping, Zhao Zhongqi, and Xu Jiling should all be subject to Magnitsky and other international sanctions for their role in dangerously increasing tensions between the two nuclear powers. Already yesterday, or the day before, we've seen the U.S. impose Magnitsky sanctions on individuals involved in the Uyghur repression, for example, the concentration camps in Western China. India's historic and continued self-reliance with respect to China and Pakistan and its attempt to match Chinese forces at incursion points is admirable. Joint patrols with Japan and France and a shared bases agreement with Australia, all in 2020, are positive, but they are not enough to stop China. China and Pakistan are allied, and despite India's self-soothing reporting on its stronger mountain forces, China has nuclear, air, and naval superiority. India's lack of treaty defense allies plays into China's strategies of incrementalism and divide and conquer tactics, and explains, along with Chinese influence in the country, why India is desperate to limit escalation even at the cost of loss of territory. India's military and alliance weaknesses all but invite a disastrous two-front war launched by China and Pakistan. A better strategy for India and democracies globally would be to join forces with allies that seek to balance against the alliance between and limit the influence of China, Pakistan, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Joining forces against these aggressive countries will not in any way compromise the autonomy of India, but will rather ensure its defense. Thank you so much for allowing this talk.
Thank you, sir. And both the speakers, I would like to thank them specifically for keeping to the time schedule. Is it possible now for General Mukherjee to speak? Shall we? General Mukherjee?
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be with you. I'd particularly like to thank the Institute of Social and Cultural Studies and Sri Arindam Mukherjee for inviting me to speak at your webinar. Now I'm going to rush through whatever I have to say, because I have a lot of ground which I'd like to cover in a very short period of time. I'm not going to restrict myself to Galwan proper. I'm going to put across the broader spectrum. First, I'll talk a little about geopolitics and geostrategy related to China. You have Western theorists, Robert Kaplan, who preaches the aspect of the heartland philosophy, and the heartland primarily being Central Asia, Afghanistan and surrounding areas, and therefore China having its eye and trying to expand towards that area to gain control of it. You have Nicholas Spikeman propagating the rimland theory, and that countries in temperate climates with access to the sea and who dominate the heartland, being all powerful, and therefore he talks about China being a very strong nation. Then you have Samuel Huntington, who talks about the clash of civilizations. Whilst essentially he talks about the Muslim and the Western world, a certain part of it, he does talk about the yellow races and others, and the clash of civilizations between them. Then you have Halford Mackinder propagating again the heartland theory and talking about the geographical pivot of history being Central Asia again. Then, of course, you've got Paul Bracken talking about globalization, the crisis of space, and hence confrontation being inevitable. There are people who are also talking about China having scope to move westward into the vacuum of the Central Asian republics and the Middle East and north into Mongolia and Siberia. In Southeast Asia, blocked by India to reach out into the Indian Ocean and the island chains. India and Japan, therefore, form natural enemies because they block China expanding to the east and southeast. You then have the issue being propagated that India has an insecure frontier. Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, also being politically divided due to demography based on river basins, forests and mountains, and hence being vulnerable. Then you've got the Indian philosopher in terms of Chanakya in Arthashastra, and the philosophy in Arthashastra being that you must befriend your enemy's enemy, and issues related to surprise and deception. Then you've got Sun Tzu and Confucius, which are followed explicitly by China. In fact, the entire Galwan incident and Eastern Ladakh incidents, they have followed Sun Tzu to the T in terms of trying to surprise India with outright deception. Now I'll come on to general information related to India's border with China. Approximately 4,000 kilometers, though the Chinese claim is just about 3,500, because of different perceptions of the LSE. It's illegally seized and claimed since 1954, 140,000 square kilometers. This includes Pakistan having illegally ceded 6,500 square kilometers and Aksai Chin, 38,000 square kilometers being seized by China in 1959. And the balance being in Eastern Ladakh, Barahoti, UP Tibet, Himachal Tibet border sector, and the Arunachal Pradesh area. Now the claimed areas, the British, Tibetans, and actually the Chinese, though they disown it, signed an agreement in 1914 wherein the McMahon line was propagated. Now the McMahon line applies to Eastern India. On the other hand, when we talk about the LAC, we are talking about primarily Ladakh. And when you're talking about Ladakh, the claimed areas pertain to a letter written by Chu En Lai to Pandit Nehru way back in 1959, wherein he stated more or less generally what was the alignment of the LAC. That was further clarified during the Colombo proposals in 1962, as also clarified in terms of the line up to which the Chinese penetrated during the 1962 war in Ladakh. So here we have the McMahon line in the east, the LSE in the west, but colloquially speaking, we also talk about the LSE in the east relating to actually claimed areas by China. We then have the disputed area of Barahoti in the UP Tibet border sector and a small part of Lahaul Spiti in the Himachal Pradesh sector. In Nepal, we're talking about the Kalapani belt, where the Chinese have forced the Nepalese to put across their claims to the Lipu Lake Tri-Junction. You have in the area in Barahoti in the UP-Tibet border sector. You have in Sikkim, the Fingers area, which is right up in the north, just north of Nakula Pass, where an incident took place recently. Thereafter, as far as Sikkim and Bhutan are concerned, you've got the area of the Tri-Junction between Tibet, Sikkim, and Bhutan. The Chinese claim it is further south in order to claim the Dolam Plateau. Some people call it Doklam, but the actual pronunciation is Dolam Plateau. Then the Chinese have already walked into the area of Saritang, Hala, Kyula, and parts of central and eastern Bhutan. The parts of central and eastern Bhutan have not been occupied by them, but are being claimed by them now. The recent claim of the Sakteng Reserve Forest Area. Then you've got the entire Tawang tract and the Bhutan, Tawang, or in other words, Bhutan, Arunachal, and Tibet Tri-Junction, which again they claim is further to the south, in order to claim the whole of the Tawang tracts. And when they claim the whole of the Tawang tracts, they're claiming all the way up to Bomdila and further south, besides Tawang. Then in the Subansiri River Valley, they claim the Asafila and Longju areas. In the Siang sector, though not yet claimed, but their patrols have been coming in to the Bhutia-speaking areas. Then you come on to the Dibang Valley in the Fishtails area. Due to a cartographic error made immediately after independence, the extreme eastern portion of India looks like a fishtail. So India by mistake showed that as part of China. So as part of Tibet. So they claim that also, even though it is in Indian possession. Then Lohit and Walong, they again claim the Tri-Junction should be further south. All Tri-Junctions are claimed to be further south. They also claim the entire area up to Walong. Now, you've also had a series of agreements between the Indians and Chinese. In 1962, the Colombo Agreement. Then, immediately after Sikkim, in 1967. Then again, in 1993, the Border Peace and Tranquility Accord. Then 2005, in Manmohan Singh's time. 2009, another agreement. Then 2016, Wuhan, and then Mamallapuram. The standoff currently in Eastern Ladakh, before Eastern Ladakh, it took place first in Sikkim at the Nakula area, then was followed by Galwan, Pangangso, and other areas in Eastern Ladakh. Now, this has been covered in detail on TV, so I'm not going to spend any time on that, except to cover what is the latest status in terms of withdrawal. The latest status, as on this evening, is that the Chinese have pulled back from Galwan, about 1.8 kilometers. We have also pulled back a similar amount, but we have lost out in the bargain, in the sense that we've pulled out further from our own territory where the Chinese had come into. So the Chinese are now closer to a new LAC and are able to intrude much easier. Whereas earlier we used to patrol up to patrol point 14, we no longer will be able to do so under the present terms, unless that changes. As far as Pangangso is concerned, the Chinese have pulled back from the lower slopes of Finger 4 but they're still on the heights. They're still there on finger 5, 6, and 7. And they are apparently refusing to budge from there so far, till the next set of meetings takes place. Then as far as hot springs and Gogra is concerned, and the Chinese have pulled back as promised. Indian side have also pulled back. The Depsang plains are still under discussion. The Debio area, Demchok, Chamar are also still under discussion, where the Chinese had attempted to intrude. Now, I'll quickly cover the contentious issues. I have just got 3 or 4 minutes left, so I'm going to rush through these in Sino-Chinese relations. 1962 was not a border dispute. It was to teach India a lesson for supporting the Dalai Lama, trying to be superior to China, rivalry in the Politburo in China, strife in China, to divert attention, and due to the US preoccupation with Cuba. They had no love lost for Nehru either. 1959 onwards, 62, 67, 86, 87, we had frequent incursions. You've also had the latest incursions being at Dolam, Tuting, and Tuting in Siam. There's a lot of war hysteria as far as the PLA is concerned, and extensive modernization of the PLA. Their Middle Kingdom attitude, in which they want to throw about their superiority and their economic rise, involves their looking down on everyone else. As a result of the border dispute, they built up tremendous infrastructure in Tibet, offensive infrastructure. They are supporting Pakistan fully. Even now, for the Galwan incident, Pakistan has supported them by bringing 2 divisions, infantry divisions, into the Gilgit-Baltistan area. UN Security Council, they have blocked our entry. The Nuclear Suppliers Group, again, they blocked our entry. They've been colluding with Pakistan on J&K, nuclear proliferation, and supplying them with weapons. On the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, OBOR, India has not agreed to join them. As a result, they are quite irritated with India over that, as also on the BCIM and the BRI. They are also instigating India's small neighbors and trying to contain China, trying to set up a string of pearls at Chokpu in Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Djibouti in Sudan, and Gwadar. They're trying to alienate Sri Lanka and Nepal from India. Trying to do so in Bhutan also now, and Myanmar. Northern Myanmar is as good as China. They've also supported Pakistan extensively on Masood Azhar. Brahmaputra, they're trying to dam it and divert part of the water. Trade balance, the deficit is colossal, which worries us. And they're flooding India's northeast, particularly, with their goods. The present build-up in eastern Ladakh is a breach of agreement with India. Why are they annoyed with India? Sanctuary to the Dalai Lama, interference in Tibetan affairs, the border dispute, India's causing up to USA, Japan, Australia, and other Southeast Asian nations. India interfering in South China Sea, not bowing down to China, not agreeing to CPEC or OBOR or the BCIM, blocking China and the Dolam incident, poor opinion of Indian democracy, blaming China for the, India is blaming China for the coronavirus fiasco, trying to take away industry from China, Then India promulgating abrogation of Article 370 and 35 alpha in Kashmir, thereby threatening to take back Aksai Chin from the Chinese, as also the whole of POK, which China considers therefore to be a threat to their entire project. Threatening to block Chinese collusion with Pakistan to link up with Gilgit, and India's infrastructure along the Galwan Valley, they feel threatens the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Indian politicians have also threatened to recapture POK, northern areas, and Aksai Chin. And lastly, they worry about India in the Indian Ocean and blocking their way. As far as I'm concerned, a quick thought on the way forward. Nobody can choose their neighbors. So whether India likes it or not, it has to resolve differences. We have to resolve differences and come to some sort of agreement with China without bowing down to them. You have to have a rational foreign policy. You must get into an economic partnership, arrive at a border settlement, give and take, and do not align with the United States bloc unless it's inescapable. That's all I have. I think I've overshot by a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Mukherjee. It doesn't matter that you have overshot for a few minutes. It is such a profound and all comprehensive presentation, not only of a pictorial three motives, strategic motives of China, how India is reacting, how Indian rhetoric has trapped us vis-a-vis the Chinese. My summation of General Mukherjee's speech, it was really excellent summation of the problem that confronts us and the way forward. Thank you again, General Mukherjee. I'll ask now Subir Bhowmik to come in.
I will quickly, focus myself on 4 points. A lot has been said, and I've heard my good friend Anders and General Mukherjee, again, another old friend. I'll focus on three things. You've talked about this rhetoric, this whole nonsense about promising something or threatening something which we are not in a position to carry out. Now, India has to learn that rhetoric is no solution to actual conduct of foreign policy. Useless rhetoric, which may win elections, don't win us wars, don't gain us any diplomatic breakthrough anywhere. And this, until and unless is understood by people who run India, is going to bring disaster. So people should realize that sitting and talking and promising certain things, especially when it involves China, you're not dealing with Maldives here. You're not dealing even with Sri Lanka. Yeah, that is something that has to be understood. As a student of international relations who have focused closely on conduct of diplomacy, this is a point I'll make. Don't say something that you can't do. And don't, set the enemy up for something which you're not prepared for. So no rhetoric again, and no rubbish rhetoric particularly. This is number one. Number two, what have you done for the soldiers on ground? What have you done for General Harinder, who is having a tough job? Having provoked the Chinese by saying that you intend to take back Aksai Chin, which is sensitive from their point of view because it connects Xinjiang with Tibet, that national highway. And they have been sensitive about this since the time this road was made. Now you say that I'll take back Aksai Chin. Yeah? You've not done NCC in your life. You've not picked up a 303 rifle. You may be the Home Minister of India. You have no business to say things like this. Having provoked them, then when the Chinese come at you like mad dogs, you're then trying to tell your soldiers and your generals 3 Ds. Disengage, diffuse, de-escalate. So you are asking these guys to sit in the car when the mad dogs are rushing at you with a clear instruction, don't fire, don't shoot, to kill them. you just save your leg and sit inside the car. That's not how a military is expected to function. Yeah, you're denying the soldiers, you're denying the general the right to area domination, the right to side domination, which is how a tough border, especially one with the Chinese, has to be handled. You can't ask your soldiers to put on bangles and sit inside their trenches, even as you have, upset the enemy and brought them at your doors. So here is where we are going wrong. That you say something, you provoke a situation, then you go extra defensive, and then your prime minister ends up saying, "Ye to kuch aaya hi nahi tha." As Anders rightly said, this is not borne out. The Chinese were right inside, and they were creating problems. And they were there in point 14, and they were there in several other places. So this is point two. The third point is, I really don't understand why the Indian army or the other, Indian government functionaries handling media are trying to sanitize the coverage. Why are you trying to keep down and deny the right of the nation to know? Mr. Goswami says, India wants to know. I'm not Mr. Goswami, and I'm not pretentious like him. But let me make this clear. That nation has a right to know. Please read K.P. Dalvi, where he says that trying to deny the nation the right to know is the recipe for disaster. The people should exactly know what's going on there. And there, if your soldiers were initially taken aback because of confusion in Delhi, because of politicians, diplomats screwing up with soldiers and generals, the guys later fought back like heroes. The Indian soldier, mind you, if we lose a war, anytime we've done that, it's because of the generals. Sorry, John, you're out there, and I don't mean to say, anything against generals per se. But I'm trying to say that when we had good generals like Manekshaw, Jacob, Arora, we have won the war. When we have had fools like Thapar and Kaul, we have got screwed up. But there is no doubt that the Indian soldier and the junior commander is second to none in the world. You will never get a Major Shaitan Singh who stands up with his company against a full Chinese brigade in Razangla, or a guy like Vikram Batra who has got this, award and could have gone home saying Dil Mange More. You won't get that in the Chinese army. One child policy, no Chinese soldier wants to die. You understand this? That's a big weakness. And this is something that's come to me from a Vietnamese officer who has interrogated Chinese, that the Chinese are falling at their feet, saying, I'm the only son of a father, don't kill me, don't do anything. And again, prosperity brings its own problems. Whereas our soldiers lug their weight, entire thing up 20, 30 kilometers almost every other day, the Chinese move around in helicopters. Even a Chinese expert has recently said that India has the best mountain divisions in the world. Not US, not USSR, certainly not China. And they're fair enough to say this when they make this analysis. So the problem here is that we have the finest soldiers. The way someone like Gurtej Singh fought, killed 12 Chinese himself. Now, why is people creating problems for a man like Subir Bombay? Why is somebody in Delhi trying to tell the formations, go and sue this man because he has put out the story of, Lieutenant Viral Das? Every army, do you remember Vasily Zaitsev, the hero of Stalingrad, the sniper? Every army builds up a role model. And if with guys like us who have access to the ground, who know people in the formations, who don't depend on that bloody PRO sitting there, I'm sorry for the language, but I'm upset. We are trying to build this thing up, and we are trying to side the Chinese. And here are some set of people who are ultra defensive, who are trying to sanitize the coverage. What for? Why? Why are they trying to deny your soldiers the rightful place that they've done? Why are people, not coming up with the story of Viral Das or Gurtej Singh or many of these other guys, where they each took on the Chinese, 5 of them, 6 of the Chinese together. The Sardars went and picked up their colonel, which is why we could get back all their prisoners. So why is this media policy, going wrong? The media does not go wrong and is encouraged to cover the prime minister or the home minister or every other minister. Why does it go wrong when it comes to covering soldiers and their bravado and their heroics? This is very important. for the morale of the Indian Army. Today, on the instruction of some big guy there in Delhi, who failed in the commando course and then went on to become big, there are people here trying to file cases against us that you have done this story about Virol Das. Sensationalize कर दिया. क्या sensationalize कर दिया? ये झूठ है कि उसने Chinese मेजर को पिटा ही नहीं किया. बिल्कुल पीटा है. Video है. But you are trying to create all these problems. You know, why are you trying to shoot your own people in their foot? Go and fight the Chinese. The point I'm trying to make here is not because it's personal, but because I believe that people like us have a role to play. And there are people there in Delhi who tell us, you're not looking after national interests, okay? We have our own battles. We have fought our own battles with the Chinese. Mr. Banerjee is here. Ask him how Mitsun Dam was stopped. How Mitsun Dam, the biggest project of China and Burma, was stopped. And who are the people who are doing it on ground, provoking the Burmese? I'm trying to say something, you know, we're all soldiers in our own ways, fighting our battles in different areas. There are some people who think that national policy is their damn monopoly, and they go wrong every time because they have a limited vision. This is number 3. The last point I'll make here, and very strongly, is that give the soldier his due. Give him the proper equipment. Give him what he needs to fight. The Indian soldier is not an American soldier who wants chocolates and creams and beer and this and that. The Indian soldier fights the whole day with roti and sabji, with a good dal, with kadak chai. That's all he wants. Give him that. Don't deny him that. And the most important thing, and I say this because I come from a military school, I have this, you know, I know what the Johnnies face, what the junior commanders face on ground. You know, don't give them an impossible task and then sermonize, sitting in Delhi. You guys have never picked up an NCC. You have not done NCC. You have not picked up a bloody rifle in your lifetime, and you are lecturing people about war. And there are all these guys sitting, you know, pontificating in TV studios and talking of war. Ask them to stand when there is shelling in the LOC. They'll go yellow in their pants. I'm sure of this. All these anchors and all these big jokers. And the last point, the Chinaman is not invincible. Yeah? The Chinese don't have a Kshatriya tradition. They don't have a samurai tradition either. 1-to-1. An Indian soldier is more than a match. I've seen this in Doklam when no other journalist went. I was sitting in Nathan. General Mukherjee, you'll know where it is. Yeah? I remember this Sardar who came and told me, the Havildar. I asked him, Saabji, bada jang shang kita? Have you fought a big war? Chaddo ji, kabaddi khelya, bandanu utha ke patka, machhar hai chati. These are mosquitoes, we just lifted and threw them off. Sardar, usual Sardar bravado. But you know what? Why are these people, you know, who have done something, why are they not projected as role model? Why can't the chief go and give them a commendation? Instead of listening to fools who are telling him, sanitize kar do. China provoked ho jayega. Kya China provoke ho jayega? Provoke to aapke minister ne kiya hai. Ab kya provoke ho jayega? Bakwas karte hain. Secondly, last point I want to make here, and I'm very clear. The Chinaman is not invincible. You probe him hard. You give him ideas that if he creates mischief in Ladakh, there are 3 other points where you can have him. Yeah? You can have him in Myanmar. Believe me, you can. You can have him in some of the other places. Because the Chinaman is a mercantile phenomena today, like the Lalas in our country. So they have business interests. Yeah? They have business interests in many, many places. Balochistan. Speak to a Chinese. He is scared. Oh, is India building up this thing in Balochistan? I said, yes. If you guys do it in Northeast, we'll do it in Balochistan. We'll do it in Tibet. We'll do it in a couple of other places. I was the man who developed this thesis of insurgent crossfire, which is typical of this whole area. That you finger me here, I finger you there. So the last point is, try to make peace with China. We need peace with China. Of course we need that. And I support John on that. Because no soldiers want war. And John is absolutely right when he says this. But the point is, be prepared to finger him in 15 places if he's trying to finger you in 5. You know, that's deterrence. The Chinese know it. They understand this very well because they're smart guys. They're not like this banzai Japanese who will start a war and then lose it very badly because they have opened too many fronts. They're not like the Germans of 1940s. These guys are very smart guys, and they exactly know, where to hit, how far to go. And then moment they are hit back, they say, we want peace, Hindi chini bye bye, and they will go back. I've seen these guys on the border. We exactly know who these guys are. So point is, you have to prepare a holistic national policy. And I'm not being a hawk, though there are hawks in China. Have you heard of the Jingpai? 117 people. Yeah? So you don't have to be a hawk, just for the rhetoric sake of it, okay? To win a few elections. Be a hawk. Tell the Chinese, we want peace. We want good relations. We support your prime minister when he says that, handshake across the Himalayas. But handshake across the Himalayas must be handshake across the Himalayas. You come with any claws or something on your hands, I'm going to break your bloody finger, right? And I know how to do it. And many Indians know how to do it. Give those Indians a sane policy. Don't sit there with all these jokers who have not picked up a rifle in their life in NCC, who will tell you about military policy. Inko bhagao wahan se. Bilkul bhagaiye. And second, last point, absolutely the last point. Sorry, Banerjee, if I'm overshooting. The absolute last point is that apart from these multiple pressure points which we can work and message the Chinese that we can do all this, if you do this. The vital point that Anders made, alliances. We need to have alliances, and we need to have practical operating alliances. You just don't say Quad and they say, no, I can't invite the Australians because the Chinese will be upset. But if you have cast the die, go ahead with it. If you have picked up a fight, that's my theory. If I pick up a fight with somebody, I'm not going to give him 2 punches and leave him with a few bruises here. I'm going to break his bloody neck. That's my idea. Because otherwise, you leave a half-injured snake, it's going to come back when it has recovered, it remembers you, it's going to bite you. That's true. I'm not saying Chinese are snakes. Sorry if people think that's what I'm saying. I have a lot of Chinese friends. The other thing is, China has a lot of vulnerability. My Chinese sister, Jiang Maozia, says she wants to do PhD outside China because in China, she can't do PhD without sleeping with a supervisor. There's this major general who is now in jail who has a 1-acre plot and 18-room mansion 3 kilometers from Portland City. John, what have you done in life, John? Major general, lady, in charge of transfers and postings, 1 acre. So something like, 3 kilometers from, Connaught Place, yeah? And I'll finish on a very humorous note. You remember Zhao Yongkang, the National Security Advisor? I tell this to Mr. Dole, who's a good friend of mine. Sir, aapne zindagi mein kya kar liya? Why? That guy has now been charged. He had a 44-room mansion. 42 rooms, concubines. Great Chinese tradition. Even Marshal Chute, the great communist, had 220 concubines before he became a communist and left all those behind him. 42 concubines. So what are those other 2 rooms for? One is an MI room. My Chinese sister says, brother, he's very active. Therefore, he needs an MI room, medical room, because something can go wrong. And what is the last thing? Oh, after all, he's a national security advisor, so makeshift office. He needs computers, safe phones, there's that, which Banerjee will know better than me. I mean, this is a corrupt country. The Chinese Communist Party is the biggest criminal syndicate in the world. You speak to some of the rich people in China and they tell you this, that if you are too rich in China, you have to run away. You have to leave behind, your property for Wang Qishang or some of those flunkies of Xi Jinping. It's a criminal syndicate. At the end of the day, this is where their vulnerabilities are. China, India, maybe a country which bends and bends and bends, maybe will not break. Hard, it does not bend, it breaks when it breaks. Thank you.
Thank you, Subir, for that very impassioned analysis. And if the chat indications are there, it's you are really the most popular of the speakers so far. But let me try to.
I'm more hawkish than generals and intelligence officers.
let me try to.
Jingpai. I'm copying the Chinese. Jingpai.
Let me try to bring reality back.
Hi, Anders.
My presentation of China-Pak relations.
Right. Sorry.
Traditionally described in almost reverential terms in Pakistan, The relationship is described as deeper than the seas and higher than the mountains. China has always seen its commitment to Pakistan as arising from its need to tie India down and keep needling us without necessarily, and this is important, without necessarily binding down its own flesh and blood in the latter's support. There is no defense treaty or explicit guarantee to Pakistan's security, though in the backdrop of Pakistan's deteriorating ties with the US in the last 2 decades, notably over safe havens extended to global terrorists like Osama bin Laden, China has extended greater support in supply of both conventional defense armaments, JF-17 aircraft, naval warships, as well as nuclear-capable missile technology in collaboration with North Korea, which has helped Pakistan test its nuclear capacity, first in secret, and now openly helps develop unsafeguarded plutonium-based facilities at Kushab, the reactors 1 to 4. In international fora, as Dr. Kaur had pointed out so clearly, China has veered towards more open and determined support of Pakistani positions on Kashmir, both before and after Article 370 abrogation, as also while stonewalling on the blacklisting of Masood Azhar as a global terrorist in FATF deliberations and on admitting India to the nuclear suppliers group. General Mukherjee also mentioned this. Post Galwan, the Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi spoke to China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, ostensibly extending moral support. Expectedly also, much glee was voiced in the usually hostile vernacular and even English press in Pakistan over the perception of India having got a bloody nose at Galwan. Prime Minister Imran Khan was briefed in quick succession at ISI headquarters. These developments should not unduly alarm us over an impending or a dangerous two-fronts situation. Pakistan officially denied a build-up of troops in the Gilgit-Baltistan sector, though the report about 2 divisions being sent there is possibly correct. While we cannot be complacent about possible attempted mischief to undo the 1984 hurt at Siachen, at a juncture when Indian forces' attention is focused on the LAC, trouble spots, Pakistan's acutely distressing economic situation does not seriously permit them to think of offensively trying to tie up the Indian army in major encounters across the LOC. And China itself may not be too keen to enlist Pakistani military support at present, as it considers its own military superiority across the Western Theatre Command as overwhelming. The CPEC. It was officially launched by President Xi Jinping during his visit to Pakistan in April 2015 as a pilot project of the Belt and Road Initiative. It includes planned investments in infrastructure projects, roads, railway, power and employment generation through developments in agriculture, livestock, horticulture. 9 completed early harvest projects and 13 projects under construction have already seen a total investment of rupees 19 billion. However, there are some problematic aspects of the CPEC, which I must point out. While it is one of the largest bilateral investment projects anywhere in the world, its momentum in Pakistan is being questioned. Pakistan has a serious fiscal deficit, a huge foreign debt, and a heavy debt servicing burden. The capacity to provide supporting funds for CPEC construction from its own budget, has declined sharply. The public sector development program for the year 2021 contained rupees 21 billion allocation for projects under the CPEC. The specter of swamping Chinese indebtedness stokes real fear today in Pakistan. The opacity of Chinese contracts with governments are cited as troubling. Some worry about the risk of asset seizure in case Pakistan fails to repay its Chinese loans. Sri Lanka is often cited as a cautionary tale in this regard. Loan repayment commitments to China to the tune of rupees 6 billion over the next few months may have already piled up for Pakistan. Phase 1 of the Gwadar Port Free Trade Zone has been completed, covering an area of 923 hectares. Development work in Gwadar has been plagued by chronic water supply shortages and labor employment issues. The Baluch are very upset over lack of employment, adequate employment to Baluch labor. Terrorist attacks launched by Balochistan separatists, and Subir would have us believe that many of these have an Indian or alleged Indian hand, as the Pakistanis are so fond of saying. But the Baluch are very disturbed on their own. And this has increased the threat to Gwadar port and to the Chinese workforce to the extent that a full division strength of Pakistan army has had to be deployed in protection of the Chinese workers and engineers there. To sum up, the CPEC remains a very important flagship project for China. In the context of Pakistan's paranoid insecurities vis-a-vis India, however, China's support is likely to remain confined more to the moral than the material. Thank you. Throw it open to the floor for questions. Now, there are 5 or 6 questions. The rest of it is all accolades for Subir's impassioned presentation. Among the questions, the most are addressed to Dr. Kaur. Mr. Santanude has asked, to what extent is diplomatic resolution possible? Sanchari Dasgupta has asked, will this involve a political decision, if I've understood her question right? Anirban Basu talks about PRC bullying and how far the Quad can be a good option. Anusuya Chatterjee again asks about reframing or re-examining the framing of US policy in the light of Chinese aggression. And again, I suppose Dr. Kaur would be most well qualified to take this question. So as we go along, we can have perhaps more questions. I will now throw it open for discussion. Dr. Kaur could perhaps take on some of these questions first.
Oh, thank you. I don't think I'm the most qualified, but maybe I'm the newest to the organization, so some people are curious about my opinion. I mean, one thing that I want to start with is I'm very concerned to hear, whenever the Chinese say, oh, we're making a deal to pull back, where the Chinese pull back and you pull back, what that's creating is a space in between that's of a buffer zone that's now terra nullius. Nobody's there, and China can take it later. This is exactly what they did in South China Sea at Scarborough Shoal in 2012. They made a deal with the Philippines to both pull their Coast Guard ships back from Scarborough Shoal. And by the way, it was brokered by the Democratic Party in the U.S., Kurt Campbell. He was at the time he was Undersecretary of State for Asia. But what happened there was the Chinese immediately moved back into to the Scarborough Shoal and grabbed it. And now they're still sitting on it 8 years later. And then what happened to Kurt Campbell, who was the U.S. State Department guy who brokered this deal? He now has business in China. So we have a real problem with Chinese influence and the ability of the Chinese to influence the top leadership of our political parties. And there's a guy named Clive Hamilton has just written an excellent book on this. It's called Hidden Hand, and it's all about how China uses its influence globally to compromise heads of state, whether that's David Cameron, Tony Blair, President Trump, et cetera. So you've got a real problem there. Someone asked, is diplomacy possible with China? I really don't think so. I think there's much too much emphasis on diplomacy right now, and that diplomacy and the almost desperation among the U.S., India, Europe to address China diplomatically is taken by China as a weakness. And as soon as we start talking diplomacy, they know they can move in and take more territory. They know they can take technology. They can steal technology. They know they have some terra nullius. They know they have a buffer zone that's free and open for them to grab without a risk of military defeat. So I think that what Subir is saying is actually correct, in that he says, give the soldiers on the ground the ability to fight back and break necks. Okay, and it sounds very tough and it sounds very undiplomatic, but unfortunately with the Chinese, that's what's required. You need to delegate responsibility down to the local level in terms of military response so that the Chinese know that they can't affect the top level leaders for a calm and diplomatic approach. You have to deploy it down, you have to deploy decision-making power on military matters down to the local commanders, because those are the guys that are getting angry enough to actually fight back. And we need to fight back against China when they cross the line, and we need very clear lines in order to stop them. That's the only way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur. And this brings me to a related question adopted by Government of India or Indian Armed Forces towards recovery of the said territories which were under Chinese occupation. Would a limited war be an effective one, or diplomatic engagement is the only route left for General Mukherjee?
As far as troops are on the ground are concerned, I don't think there are any real restrictions placed on them to defend our territory. They will defend it to the last breath. But at the same time, I think one must understand the constraints that there are. Number one, you have two divisions of Pakistan poised in Gilgit and Baltistan. You have two Chinese divisions which have built up opposite eastern Ladakh. You have three group armies that have been mobilized and are on the move, to the best of my knowledge. And in addition to that, the border defense forces that are already there. We've also built up a fair amount of resources. We would definitely be able to do what is necessary to restore status quo ante and react in a different area. Which is probably what would be required, rather than trying to bang our heads against a brick wall on top of high mountains. We may have to retaliate elsewhere to force the Chinese to fall back. But these are matters of detail and matters of decision making by higher commanders on ground. Now, I've seen a lot of questions out there saying, why have we given territory to them? Nobody's given any territory so far. At the moment, you've only had talks for disengagement. And some disengagement has taken place or is in the process of taking place. There is still a lot more issues of troops falling back to their permanent locations and so on and so forth to be carried out. I think that will take the entire campaigning season to complete. I don't see a fallback of troops being completed before winter. But I do believe that the Chinese will ultimately fall back, having put across the point that they wanted to. I don't think they'd retain any further territory in this area, as they withdrew earlier. In this case also, they would be forced to withdraw. As I said, by the end of the campaigning season, that's by October, November, I see the Chinese falling back. And if they don't, then it will be use of force by both sides. But where and how and when, that is a matter for military commanders to decide. Does that answer the question?
I suppose it does to some extent. I would again like to reiterate, though, that we need not worry too much about the two divisions from the Pakistani side. They are not in a position to take on an offensive posture. In fact, they have denied. They like to work in more surreptitious ways, where they will continue to trouble us through the use of asymmetric option of, non-state actors, etc. But they would have definitely discussed the possibility or the option of presenting a surprise to our army to take back some of the heights in Siachen. But militarily, I don't think that presents us with an immediate risk as of now. Of course, I'm not a military man, but this is my assessment as of now.
I wouldn't fully agree with you, because if I was Pakistan, I would try to take full advantage of the situation.
Would Subir like?
The point I was trying to make is, yeah, if you are Pakistan, you surely like to take advantage of this. But to take advantage, you should be in a position to actually take advantage. If your prime minister, and I think Banerjee is right, if your prime minister can't pay the electricity bills of his PMO, I don't think you have the financial wherewithals. And with the FATF thing dangling on your head like a sword, that unless you get this whole thing right on terrorism, there are going to be financial implications for it. I really think Pakistan does not have the purse strings at the moment, regardless of the fact that the Chinese may, sort of beef up their finances. I mean, how many people are the Chinese going to beef up? They're going to beef up people in Bangladesh. They're going to beef up people all over the place. Yeah, and their economy is not in fantastic shape. So Pakistan, I think, will actually take recourse to their usual mischief, the asymmetric options, कि साहब यहाँ जनाब दो चार जिहादी भेज दिया जाए, bum chala diya jaye, and all that stuff, rather than engaging two divisions in a frontal kind of a thing. Because I don't think the Pakistan army, even now, because one thing I know for sure, and I think Banerjee will bear me out, in the East, all their sources, the ISI, is slowly handing it over to the Chinese intelligence, because they are not able to handle it. The lead of them being Mr. Darwish, this Salman F. Rahman guy, who's basically a Pakistani guy, in Bangladesh. And he is in the Prime Minister's office. And that says a lot about what's happening in Bangladesh. Slowly, he's being handed over to the Pakistanis. And increasingly, he's playing a major role in getting all these deals done between Bangladesh. You all said Maldives, Sri Lanka. You know what's happening in Bangladesh? All the major projects are going to China, including those in which India is competent. Sheikh Hasina, because of these advisors around her, ex-Pakistan, presently Chinese advisors like Darwish ji, Salman Rahman, suddenly developed a great liking for the Chinese, and of course, rhetoric like, termites and all that has actually complicated the situation for us. What I'm trying to say is, if the Pakistan military intelligence, the ISI, does not have enough money to fund its own sources built up over years, and Banerjee knows it more than anybody else, and they're quietly handing it over to the MSS, I don't think they're in a position to undertake conventional. I mean, militarily they could. On, other factors, non-military factors, I think it's not easy for them to start off, two divisions, Hamla Kardo and all that stuff.
Thank you, Subir. If I may go back to Dr. Kaur, there is one other question which was there in the chat, which perhaps was not so much well formulated, but this refers to the possibility of reframing of US policy vis-a-vis the situation developing between India and China, or with the context, in the context of Chinese bullying of neighbors. Do you visualize, with the elections coming and a change possibly of leadership, particularly after the book that has been written by Mr. Bolton, about the manner in which decisions are taken, do you visualize a change in framing of foreign policy under the new administration?
Well, this situation, my read is that unfortunately, I think that the Biden camp is a bit closer to China, or is likely to be closer to China than the Trump camp. So if Biden wins, I think we can expect even less engagement with China than we are now in terms of being tough on China. One of the things that really was impressive, I think, that came out of India after the Galwan clash was the reaction of the people and the government against, for example, TikTok and other social media, Chinese companies, the idea of boycotts. That's great it's wonderful idea on a personal level, but to be effective, it has to be institutionalized and legislated. There has to be economic sanctions against China on a very broad level. And I think that's a positive move. And it's one way to hit back at China without getting military, without getting kinetic. As far as a strategy for getting the territory back, I think waiting until November is exactly the wrong move. We shouldn't wait until November. That's actually an off-ramp for the Indian government and for the Chinese government to allow China to take that territory and until the Indian public forgets about it or accepts it, right? So this kind of waiting game is, I think, very questionable and absolutely the wrong approach. I think a better approach, as I said, was you've got to shore up your alliances, because it ultimately has to be a military defense of the border, of the line, not 1 inch of the territory should be allowed to be lost. Because as soon as you allow 1 inch to be lost, China thinks I can grab another inch, right? That's incrementalism. It's salami tactics. It's what China does. But to fight back against China militarily, you have to have what's called escalation dominance. If the war escalates, to higher and higher levels, you have to win that final level. Unfortunately, it's my belief that China would win that final level against India if it continues to escalate. That is the reason, and the sole reason, why, in my opinion, India has to have better alliances with the United States. The United States right now is the only country in the world that can beat China militarily. Okay, and we're losing that edge over time. So if India doesn't ally with the United States in a very clear, crystal clear way, China will always think it has escalation dominance over India, and it will never be scared to take Indian territory slice by slice.
I think you got me a little wrong.
Okay, General Mukherjee.
The withdrawal process is already on, and it would continue. But what I was trying to put across is, I visualize the entire process taking the next few months, the entire de-escalation taking the next couple of months, because we are not going to pull back till we are satisfied that the Chinese have pulled back. And the fact remains is, the Chinese have started pulling back gradually, but even after they pull back, the Chinese would still maintain their reserves well within striking reach. And we are not going to pull back right out of Ladakh or within striking reach of them easily. So it's all going to take some time. But hopefully, I don't think it will lead to war. I think things could be sorted out without it.
Thank
Can
you.
I come in?
Yes, please come.
About this boycott business. Now, I'm expected to boycott Chinese goods. Mr. Banerjee, Mukherjee, everybody here is supposed to boycott. What happens when Mr. Ambani goes to China 2 weeks back, buys 4.35 lakh SIM cards, can't even make SIM cards, crony capitalist, buys that for 93 lakhs and comes and sells it. What happens to the boycott? Can't I ask Mr. Ambani, if you're a bloody patriot, don't teach me patriotism, okay? I come from the land of Subhash Bose. Don't dare do it. First go and make a bonfire of those 4,35,000 SIM cards. Mr. Adani, I've done this story. Mr. Adani goes and signs Mundra Port, $300 million deal. All these lalas who are very close to the powers that be, will never boycott the Chinese. They will do dhanda with the Chinese. And guys like me and Orindam and all of us here, yeah, Ria and all these people here, we are supposed to boycott Chinese goods. So we don't buy the SIM card from the Chinese for 5 rupees, and then Mr. Ambani comes and gives it to us for 20 rupees. Unke dhande ke liye humne sab tyag kar diya. This nonsense cannot go on. If it has to be a boycott, it has to be a comprehensive national boycott. You're talking of 59 apps being banned. I'm still on WeChat with my Chinese friends. What happens? How is it happening? So is certain things set for rhetoric, just for the consumption of Indian public? कि हमने ये सब बैन कर दिया. ठीक है भाई, आपने बैन किया. TikTok, they are going to lose a lot of money. But आपने WeChat कहाँ बैन किया? मैं तो अभी भी बात कर रहा हूँ. कुछ देर पहले मैंने बात किया है लोगों से. I have sources inside China, pretty effective sources. Let me boast. Yeah, pretty effective. I got stuff out of them. Point is, we are supposed to boycott. We are supposed to do all these things. And these jokers, these crony capitalists, who are running away with 36 people, running away with 86, lakh rupees, 86,000 crores. Yeah, 34 of them come from a great province, from where the leaders come. And they will give us lesson to me on nationalism. How dare? First, let them boycott Chinese. 54 companies, Chinese companies are there in Gujarat. पहले उनको निकालिए, फिर हमको आके भाषण देना. Okay? That's what I'm trying to say. No double standards. सीधा बात करो. I like to shoot. I'm a Rimkolian. Yeah? From an Indian military school. Shoot straight out here. बकवास बंद करो. बंद करो. नौटंकी बंद करो. Stop this nonsense. Thank you.
There is a question from Mr. DKD again about the nature of the Chinese-Pakistani support and infrastructure mechanisms and works in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, again, if I may answer this question, we may not be too much alarmed with this type of work. The Chinese have been doing this for a long time, particularly in Gilgit-Baltistan. And they take out more from Gilgit-Baltistan than they give to Pakistan.
Yeah.
So,
always.
This is not really a maneuver that leads to defensiveness against India. Indian rhetoric about capturing POK has to be backed by growth of military capacity. I don't think we have that military capacity.
Absolutely.
General Mukherjee, would you like to add anything?
No, not really. You see, those two divisions are there. It really, from a point of view of tying down our resources.
Absolutely. It's posturing. Can I come
in and make one
point? Sorry.
And therefore limit the amount of resources you can bring to bear against the Chinese. That is the basic reason. So if things come to shove and you are forced to go offensive against the Chinese, consequent to their not withdrawing, or their carrying out deception and turning back and attacking us, then in that case, we'll probably have to go in elsewhere. But that is again a matter for serving commanders to decide.
Absolutely. Mr. Pratim Ranjan Bose, would you like to add anything more? If you're still there.
I'm not an expert on military strategic issues. But what I see is, I don't agree with Shubhita's points, but that's a different issue. I don't want to get into that here. About the effectiveness of Indian the steps that we are taking. The way I look at it is that Rome will not be built in a day. We know what happened in the past, where we lacked, why the border infrastructure did not come up. So I see a continuity in the process of consolidating Indian position, and what the difference we see is because of our, where we failed for 20 odd years or 30 years to really live up to our promises. So I don't want to talk about that part, but I see a lot of, I think if I understand a little bit of the way politics is moving since the 2016 military logistics deal,
Pratim, can I ask you a question?
Just so just put it, just complete it. So that is where I think some kind of the whole thing is peaking up. In a way, the way I read it is that, we are not subservient to Chinese interests. So that is where it is happening. The friction is happening probably. That is the reason. And you also said in the same lines. Yes, Shubhita, over to you.
No, I was just trying to ask you, since you said you're not a military strategy person, but you are an economics person. You cover business, you cover finance. At the end of the day, the military strength of the country comes from its finances, comes from its economy. I mean, China could be doing the kind of modernization that John was talking about because it had a huge economic growth over the last sort of 20, 25 years. Where do you see, now we are forced into doing something on the military front, modernization and all that. But do you think the kind of economic situation that we are into, especially post-corona, we can really modernize our defense forces the way it should, the way the generals would be looking to? Is it possible? Is there not a mismatch between...
Yes, Shubhita, I can come back on this.
Yeah, please.
I would disagree with you that the economic position of a country translates into its defense ability. The world history taught us, right from Soviet Russia to Pakistan, North Korea, that there is this connection between the two, just as the growth first strategy that the world took post 1989, when we thought that economics will be ruling politics, has been proved incorrect. So I don't agree.
No, I don't agree with you there.
Just a minute.
Got the bloody nose.
Let me complete.
Soviet Union broke up because its economy collapsed.
Let me complete, sir. Let me complete. Second thing is probably, it is a question of how you look at things. So one has right to be pessimistic about Indian scene, but I can give you some. I'm optimistic about the situation, and for reasons. Number one, since whatever has happened, whether India is at par with China is a different argument altogether.
It is not.
Whether Indian capacities are less than it was in 1991 or even say 2001 or 2011 is another argument, right? So India, you see, don't get into this deficit financing and all this business. Then we have to go at the route of American treasury and its borrowings. All these things, I mean, we will just confuse ourselves. But the strength of the economy has increased substantially, and insofar as specifically, I can assure you about one thing, because I had been talking it since May. As I was speaking trade, I have been very, very actively following the recovery process. Right at this moment, we are having a booming rural market. Just yesterday, the auto numbers came out. Tractor sales is up by 20%. We are selling 20-month this is the highest production we are moving in. If we look at the CMI employment averages, we are just back to the pre-COVID level already in third week of June. I can give you endless references, but let's not get into that. What I see is that 50% straight away rural economy contribution, 45% of GDP. That is done. If we go by, and all the collaborative, there are the supporting. I can keep giving you supporting proof from various other things. I don't buy. Someone just cannot throw statistics at me. I'm a little good at that. So. Second thing is that what is left is that I think in my assumption, by October, we will see 80%, roughly 80% of the economy will be back, if not better. And provided the Kharif crop is good as per expectation. If that happens, 80% of the economy will be good. The problem areas will be the global problem areas, travel and tourism, auto component, where we have, that is around 8 to 9% of our GDP.
Basically, let's not get into this long thing. Let's just focus on one thing.
No. So on the contrary, sir, on the contrary, China's industrial index is down by 13% and industry is 45% of its GDP.
I'm aware of that.
Beginning last
we
month,
sustain our defense spending?
Please, beginning last month, it has stopped giving data. port data. What does it prove? Why did they stop giving port data? They have a lot to hide. They are in a desperate situation if we think economically, because they have grown faster. Now they have to prove to their people that they are, yes, still they are the best. Their economy is not picking up as fast, so far as I understand. Thank you.
On that optimistic, slightly optimistic note, let me conclude, as the time is also running out. So I will hand it back to Mr. Krishnendu to thank, and I also like to, on my behalf, thank all the panelists and also thank the ISCS for an excellent interaction among all the panelists and some of the people who joined us on the chat show. Over to you, Krishnendu.
Okay, this is Krishnendu. So we have now come to the end of this today's very interesting session. On behalf of the Institute of Social and Cultural Studies, we are very much thankful to Sri Rana Banerjee for giving his valuable time and wonderfully coordinating the whole session. We are also extending our heartiest thanks to all the speakers, Sri Pratim Ranjan Bose, Lieutenant General retired Sri J.R. Mukherjee, Dr. Anders Kaur, and Sri Subir Bhomik for their wonderful presentation. And finally, no programs become successful without the audience. So we have got today a very wonderful audience, and I have seen that the participation sometimes went above 70. So this audience participation is also very much encouraging for us, and we hope that we shall get similar support in our future endeavor. We are again thankful to all the speakers, the coordinator, and also to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.